Well, thank you very much. It's good to be here with everybody and be able to see some faces that aren't completely familiar to me. I've been, like many of you, stuck at home. Right now, all my plans for the summer have been put on hold until I don't know when, and so uh, getting back to see my family in Texas is right now is sort of a fantasy because of everything that's going on. And then it's just been just such a weird, strange time for us all. And so just take a deep breath and remember for a second now, before I begin, how blessed we really are to be able to have this kind of technology that keeps people together. And to have a community that chose and continues to choose not to give up, despite how easy it would be to give up. Y'all should be real proud of continuing to do what you're doing. I see 35 participants, which for this kind of service is really good. And it's just good to be here. So I'm going to take a breath and I'm going to begin with a reading. This reading is from the Inclusive Bible. It's called the Inclusive Bible, an egalitarian translation. It's by a group of people called the Priests for Equality. And they are out of an organization of all things called the Quixote Center, after Don Quixote, in College Park, Maryland. And God then said, "Waters, swarm with abundance of living beings, birds fly above the earth and in the open expanse of the sky." And so it was. God created great sea monsters and all sorts of swimming creatures with which the waters are filled, and all kinds of birds. And God saw that this was good, indeed, very good. And blessed them, saying, "Bear fruit and increase your numbers and fill the waters of the seas, and birds abound on the earth." And evening came, and morning followed, the fifth day. And then God said, "Earth, bring forth all kinds of living soul, cattle, things that crawl, wild animals of all kinds." And so it was. God made all kinds of wild animals and cattle and everything that crawls on the ground. And God saw that this was indeed very good. And then God said, "Let us make humankind in our image to be like us. Let them be stewards of the fish in the sea and the birds of the air and the cattle and the wild animals and everything that was on the ground." Humankind was created as God's reflection. In the divine image, God created them. And that they should love one another and that they might be together, God created them. And God blessed them and said, "Bear fruit, increase your numbers, and fill the earth, and be responsible for it. Watch over the fish of the sea, and the birds of the air, and all the living things of the earth." And God then told them, Look, I give you every seed-bearing plant on the face of the earth, and every tree whose fruit carries in it seeds, and they will be your food. And to all the animals of the earth and the birds of the air and the things that crawl on the ground, everything that has a living soul in it, I give all the green plants for food." And so it was. And God looked at all of this creation and proclaimed that this was good. Indeed, it was very good. And evening came, and morning followed, the sixth day. So, rain. I awoke to it. It was dark, and the steady pounding of what seemed like were golf ball size raindrops roused me out of what was a very sound sleep. Soon it would be morning, I realized, and I knew I was probably going to spend the next 10 hours walking in steady rain. And there was nothing I could do about it. It was Saturday morning, and Sunday was 24 hours away, and the church I was scheduled to preach in would be filled with people waiting for a service to begin, preferably with me up at the front to begin the service. And so there was no waiting out the rain. My car was about 15 miles away, and I couldn't just sit there and wait for it to end. And I thought to myself, this is not good. Not good indeed. And so I rolled over in my sleeping bag and I looked out under the edge of the tarp that was keeping me sort of dry. And the sun was just beginning to show its light beyond the horizon. And through the brush, I saw a mixture of mist that laid low on the ground, and the steady raindrops pierced the misty shroud, and individual sounds of millions of drops striking the leaves, first high in the sky and then falling lower to hit the underbrush and still lower to land upon the soil, combined into this cacophony of tapping and rapping that seemed to draw my thoughts inevitably, darkly, to the day that was ahead. I envisioned in my mind streams that were swollen over their banks and mud-swept trails and leaking boots and ever-persistent water finding its way into every single nook and cranny. And I thought, this is not good indeed. And that trite cliche came into mind. Into each life rain must fall. And then April showers bring May flowers. It didn't matter. It was rainy and it was cold and I was getting wet, and the anticipation of what was to come came to mind. I had to get up in the rain and cook my breakfast in the rain and clean up in the rain and pack all my stuff that was going to be cold and wet in the rain. And then I had to hike for miles and miles in the rain. There was no way in the world I was going to stay dry. And that meant I was going to be cold and wet and uncomfortable all the day through. This was not good indeed. But there was no choice. I had no choice but to walk, because hiking in the rain is a necessity sometimes. Generally, there's no time to just sit and wait and wait. You can maybe pass out, like, you can wait out a passing rain shower, right? Or an afternoon thunderstorm. You can sit and wait for it to pass by. But when the rain begins well before dawn and is set to continue for the rest of the day, waiting around isn't an option. It can feel as if all your freedom is stripped away. Hiking in the rain, encased in Gore-Tex, the sound of pounding raindrops drowning out all other sounds, even your own thoughts. And you're forced to go on. You're forced to walk even though you don't want to. And what I learned in hiking in the rain in this hike was that when the weather is wretched and the trail is wet and slippery and the air is cold and the body is weak, when all seems to be going wrong and you just want to stop, there is still a choice. As I set off that morning, it was a cold, biting spring rain. It dripped over the hood of my rain jacket and down my collar. It found its way into my boots. It covered the glasses I then wore. And I slogged and I slipped and I tripped and I moaned. Let me tell you about how much I moaned and complained under my breath through miles and miles of cold, wet, muddy, nasty trail. And I would say again and again, not good indeed. This was not what I came there for. It was not turning out as I thought it would, which would be me standing alone, surrounded by the simple, quiet, joyous beauty of nature, triumphant on top of a mountain, right? No, instead I was cold and wet and muddy and miserable. And I became ever more disheartened. And I began to imagine this whole thing is sort of an existentialist metaphor for life. And I came up with my own existentialist quotation that I want to put in a book someday. And it goes like this. It says, "We can but walk through the cold rain toward a distant goal. And when we reach that goal, we'll still be wet." It could have been Sartre or Camus. And sometime near noon, I sat down on a rock and I ate my lunch. I had cold tuna out of a pouch and damp soda crackers. And again, what did I think? Not good. Not good indeed. When that rain comes down in sheets and when the air is damp and cold, when nothing seems to be going well, it is very easy, too easy, to want to give up. And we all go through those times. Life can become heavy. Burdens can become overpowering. But the choice is often no choice at all. Despite the rain, we have to move on. Now, Albert Camus, in The Myth of Sisyphus, wrote that there is but one truly serious philosophical problem, and that is suicide. Judging whether life is or is not worth living amounts to answering the fundamental question of philosophy. And while Camus puts that in very stark and shocking form, we make that choice. We answer that question every single morning. Each time you choose to swing your feet over the edge of the bed and place them on the floor, you have answered the question, yes, life is worth living. Now, you may think you have no choice but to get up out of bed, right? Because the snooze alarm is probably buzzing for the third or fourth time. The kids need to get on the school bus, or your boss needs that report. You say you have to get up. You say you have no choice. But you could do otherwise. You could choose otherwise. You could decide not to get out of bed. And hiking in the rain brings this simple everyday choice into clear, very personal terms. It's cold, you're wet. The only thing that keeps you going is your own 2 feet. And I found that there are 2 vital elements to being able to hike in the rain without giving up. And the first of these is what I would call doggedness, or courage, determination, fortitude, staying power, perseverance. Call it what you will. Sometimes you have to put your head down and push on. No matter how much you would like to stop, sometimes you just have to push on. And the second is a kind of faith, a non-judging acceptance of what is for what it is that allows one to greet the rain and the cold rather than just fight against it. And maybe with that openness, with that faith, maybe even see beauty in what seems to be nothing but suffering. It's an experiment in existentialism. And it involves that basic choice outlined by Camus. Move on or give up. This kind of choice, to go ahead or not, is so basic to our lives that we often forget about it until we must go on and test our strength or not. There's more to this doggedness than just forging ahead without thinking, though, right? There's always an element of choice. The existentialist formula, if you've ever heard this, can be stated simply as, we are our choices. What makes us essentially human is our freedom to choose our own ways. And each human being makes choices that create his or her essential being in every single moment. Choice is central to our human existence. We must always choose. And even the act of sitting down on the trail and refusing to move, the act of choosing to do nothing, is as much a choice as continuing to walk on. And this freedom to choose, to move on or to become static, entails commitment and responsibility. Commitment, because to be uncommitted to be without direction, to be blown and buffeted this way and that, isn't to be free at all, right? True freedom only comes when you have committed yourself to a particular path. And whatever comes along on that path, you choose to approach it. And then with that commitment to walk your path comes responsibility. You must take the risk and the responsibility of following that path wherever it leads. And that's why that determination is so important. Determination is the will and the courage to follow through on your choices, to walk the path you have chosen, even though it's not easy. And when I'm hiking, and especially when I'm alone, the only thing that keeps me moving is myself. I know at any point in time I can choose to stop. I can choose not to continue on the route I have planned out to where I am going. I can make adjustments to which way I want to go. I can turn back. I can decide to bail out early and hitch a ride into town. Every step of the way, a myriad of choices lies before me, but I am the only one responsible for the consequences, and only I can take the next step on that route. There is nobody else who can walk for me. And so as I finished up that last of my cold tuna, and I stood up and I shook off the rain and I began walking again, I had planned a particular route, and that route would take me across a large open knob called Round Top. And that knob rose up above all others. And I descended down an embankment, a steep embankment, and it was all slippery and muddy, and I struggled to stay on my feet, and I fell over a couple of times, and I had mud on my face. And I was greeted at the bottom of that gully with a sign. And one direction indicated Round Top, 6 miles. And the other direction said Route 322, 0.5 miles. I thought about that sign very, very carefully. Because from that point on, 322 was a 6 or 8 mile walk to my car. It seems like a far time, but there was a good chance that I could find a ride from a friendly forest ranger or another disheartened hiker. And if I went to 322, I could be warm and dry in about an hour. Or I could go up and over that Round Top and continue an additional 5.5 miles after that to reach my car. I thought to myself, if I'm lucky, I'll be out by dark. A choice. An existential moment. I was at a low point. Literally, I had descended into a gully, a low point, out of which I would have to climb to continue on my planned route. It was a long, steady climb, mostly mud and loose rock. Not very much fun. And then emotionally and spiritually, I was at a low point. I was cold, and I was wet, and I was tired, and I was hungry because, you know what? A pouch of tuna and some cold soda crackers do not satisfy. I was looking for an out. I was looking for an excuse. The trail to Route 322 was flat and easy, and most of all, it was short. And so I thought again. Seemed like I stood motionless there for like an hour. And then I headed off right towards 322. My choice had been made. As I walked, I looked back over my shoulder at the trail sign behind me, and I felt a twinge of guilt and shame and disappointment in myself. And so I stopped in my tracks. Round Top, said the guidebook, provided great views of the highest point in the region, and it was the source of most of the streams and rivers in the area. That place was the reason why I had planned that hike. Going to that place was the reason I had set out. It was my goal. And as often happens when I'm hiking alone, some familiar words bubbled up in my mind. The words of Universalist minister, outdoorsman, hiker, Thomas Starr King. He's kind of an idol of mine. And these words came from a book, a masterpiece of his actually, called The White Hills, about his travel in New Hampshire's White Mountains. And he wrote, "Were it not for the great swells of land, the ridges and crests of rock, the wrinkles and curves of writhing strata, how could the springs be formed? How could the rains be hoarded in fountains and lakes? Where would the storehouses of the snow and hail be?" The storehouses of the snow and hail. That's what I came to see, right? Where everything in that area began. And so, slowly and inevitably, I turned around. I made another choice. I had to go up. Now, the most creative and difficult choices we make in our lives often come at our lowest points. The most meaningful and transformative choices in our lives are never made when the route is easy to see, when the path is smooth and clear. They are made when we are at our lowest points, when the choice is between the easy and the good, or the simple and the true. It is when we have to make that kind of choice that we truly begin to exercise our freedom in responsibility. And it is in those moments, when we make those choices, that we create our best selves. These are the choices and the times when we need doggedness and courage and determination. And as I read through that just now, I started to think about the times we are in. Times when many of us feel at our lowest emotionally and spiritually, when we wonder what's going on in the world. Will things ever get better? What can we do? And we are at that kind of choice to choose for our best selves, to choose that very hard right and true over the easy good. And so as I was looking up at that long and slippery slope, I couldn't see the top. I could see up, but I couldn't see the end. I couldn't see the goal. I only knew that what I wanted to reach was somewhere up there, and that I was the only person who would get me there. And that's the way it is with all of our lives. How often do we really see our goals clearly? How often do we see where we want to get somehow shining in the distance on the top of a hill? More often than not, our goals are obscured, fuzzed out of view, and reaching them means not just having determination. Reaching them means having faith as well, a belief that even though you may not see where you want to go, even though you may not be able to see what you hope for, that what you hope for is truly worth reaching. And that doggedness and faith seem to be tied together for me. Doggedness without faith is really just pig-headedness, right? And faith without determination is just wishful thinking. And so I continued on in the rain with faith and conviction that I would find what I had come for, that my walking and my struggling and my moaning would be worth the trip. And to be honest, as I slogged and slid up that hill with rain running into my collar and mud caked onto my boots, weighing me down, I was not convinced I had made the right choice. In fact, I was pretty sure that I had screwed up and I should have just turned around. The exertion of going uphill was causing the glasses to fog over in the cold, damp air, and every step was a struggle just to stay on my feet, and my boots had begun to leak, and I thought again, not good, not good indeed. And then I thought, you know what? I should have just gone to Route 322, but it was too late. I had gone too far. And that's where openness and non-judging acceptance of what is for what it is was what I needed but could not find. I was cold and I was wet, and all I could think was I should have just headed home. And it's at these times when the world is cold, when you are worn, and when we are tired, and when we are disappointed, that openness is so important. Because our natural instinct, our natural response is to judge every situation based on what we are feeling right then. And to extend that judgment out into the future and into the future and into the future. And if we are feeling discomfort or pain or sadness, we judge that situation and we judge the world sometimes as inherently bad, as if it could be nothing else but bad. But in doing so, we're often putting layers and layers of social and cultural programming upon it, and expectations upon our lives and upon others, which if we could let go of, we could see things as they were. And maybe if we could see things as they are, they might not be what we imagined them to be. Now, the rain that had continued heavily through the morning and now into the afternoon had begun to subside. I was heading up and to the west in the late afternoon, and so the sun was ahead of me and had not yet been fully obscured by the thick overcast. It would have been a clear image directly in front of me, and even though it was covered, I could make out the faint brightness of the sun's presence somewhere behind all the gray in the sky. Then the rain became a light mist, and the noise of the forest settled into a calm, calm whisper, and gentleness filled the air. You know, and as I look back and remember it now, it must have been a very beautiful time. But in that moment, I could not experience any beauty. All my energy was being expended by concentrating on my mantra, not good, not good indeed. And all I could think about were dry clothes and a warm car. Before I knew it, I was cresting the top of that round top. And looking across that bare open hilltop in front of me was laid out a perfect nature scene. It could have been a postcard. Tall grasses waved in the breeze. 2 deer grazed along the edge of the forest. A heron took off majestically from a small pond and it slid into the distance. And the low heat from the sun was enough to start raising a thick mist from the ground, and birds sang in the distance. And if there ever could have been a perfect place containing every single thing that needed to be, it was that place right there. And then in I plotted, clomping and splashing and moaning and complaining out loud, not good at all. And with that, the deer ran off into the woods. The bird chattered at my obnoxious interruption to the day. All around us, even today, even now, are scenes of beauty and wonder and compassion and peace. Doesn't really matter what the weather is. What matters is being open to seeing and experiencing the beauty that surrounds us. It's often our attitudes that make all the difference between seeing the beauty and having it pass us by. Somewhere in the middle of that hilltop, I stopped and I raised my head and I pulled off the rain hood and I looked, and I recalled the words from another Unitarian Universalist, Robert Fulghum. And Robert Fulghum wrote the words, "Remember the book about Dick and Jane, and the first word you learned, the biggest word of all, look." Too often we're so caught up in our mindless mantras that we pass right through the beauty and wonder that surrounds us. Maybe it sounds too easy, maybe it's too simplistic, but sometimes all we have to do is remember to look. But I was so busy thinking, not good indeed, that I had nearly missed the whole reason I went on that hike, to stand upon the great swells of land and the ridges and the crests of rock and the wrinkles and the curves of writhing strata and see the storehouses of the snow and the hail. So many things in our lives can be sacred moments if we just look when they happen. And so many sacred moments, so much beauty passes us by because we are busy looking at what we think should have been, what we wished would have happened, or how we prefer things to be better. But usually perfection is right under your feet. Right under your feet. But paradoxically, to see perfection, you've got to raise your eyes up to see it. To see the world in a grain of sand and a heaven in a wildflower. Hold infinity in the palm of your hand and eternity in an hour. As I stood in the middle of that bare grassy knob called Round Top, the gray swirling sky rounding into infinity above me, I heard that mantra repeat automatically again, not good indeed. And I looked into eternity across the horizon where that heron had finally disappeared. Not good. I thought at this time as a question, what, not good? And then a tiny crack formed in the clouds and a single shaft of light shone across the still empty pond. And the words of Genesis came to mind. The first words in the Bible. In the beginning, God created heavens and the earth. And then the others from the end of that book. And God saw all that had been made, and it was good, indeed, very good. Maybe it was because the rest of my hike was downhill. Maybe it was because the rain had finally stopped. Maybe it was because the sun had started to come out, but a new phrase broke into my consciousness, and that phrase was very good indeed. Someday, sometime, each of us will again feel cold and wet and alone. The sky will be gray, the trail ahead of us will be slippery and rough, and at these times you have a choice. You can stop, you can give up, you can believe that all that is not good indeed, or you can find that dogged persistence to move on with faith and courage towards the ideals that we hold together as Unitarian Universalists, that all people are created with worth and dignity, and that all life is worthy of love, and that justice will someday reign again. With that faith and courage, you will raise your eyes towards eternity and know that this life and this world are very good indeed. And so may it be on this day and every day forward. Amen. And thank you with the deepest heart of gratitude for inviting me into your lives and giving me a moment to be with my fellow travelers on the trail of life. Thank you.